Hello and welcome everyone. This is Arman and I'm very happy to be with you today on this very special occasion of Docker's 9th birthday. And in this great event, Docker Community All Hands number 5, with all these amazing speakers and all these amazing talks, make sure you check them out as well. Today we're going to be talking about Next.js, an awesome meta framework built on top of React, and how you can efficiently use it with Docker both in development and in production. At Coyote, we've been using Next.js in production for quite some time now, and this is going to be a hands-on talk where I'm going to share some of these practices with you that also could work for you. But before we jump into that topic, let me introduce myself quickly. I'm Armagan Amcalar. I'm right now leading a company called Coyote, and Coyote is a school of software engineering where we work with career changers and create a new generation of software engineers. We also partner with startups and become their technology teams, and we build their technology products. Now, I like to talk a lot. I'm a conference speaker, and I'm also an open source author. I have numerous libraries and projects available on GitHub if you're curious, that range from front-end libraries to microservices frameworks to guitar processors in the browser to brain signals processing, and so on and so forth. Now, without further ado, let's get to the topic. Again, today we're going to be talking about Next.js, which is, I think, aptly named Next because it kind of resembles what we should be doing in 2022 with web development, the next generation of web development. But before we get to that, let's talk about the problem, specifically the problem with React, or more general, the problem with web development. Now, it's complicated. There are tons of tools, tons of libraries, technologies that you need to learn and to choose from. And there are several good, bad, and better ways to do seemingly simple things like routing or state management. And I know, don't shout at me when I say these things are simple, but they are supposed to be simple, or they were before. And everything relies on JavaScript to run in the browser. Sometimes downloading megabytes of JavaScript is necessary to render an otherwise static web page. And this makes the web a really slow and painful experience. I mean, if you're watching this video, I'm sure you're well aware of these challenges, and the current frameworks that we have don't really make it an easier journey for us. And cue Next.js, which is almost a lifesaver in this situation. Seriously, go check their webpage. They have an amazing webpage with a lot of examples, one of the best documentations I've ever seen in the open source community. And they have those examples on GitHub, so you can easily see and learn how to use Next.js for your specific scenario. And so here is a trimmed down version of what Next.js can offer to you. My favorite one is by far server-side rendering, because it gives me the ability to make my marketing teams happy by doing server-side rendering. What it does is it takes your React application, renders it server-side, and sends to the browser a fully rendered HTML that is still interactive after the browser finishes downloading the necessary JavaScript files for React and others. And we call that process hydration. So this is a very effective strategy of speeding up your web page, sometimes a little bit, but also serving your SEO needs, and also for people who have JavaScript turned off or people who don't have that much bandwidth, it is super straightforward for them to download a very simple HTML. So the overall perceived performance of your web page is like off the charts. Next.js also works with TypeScript and Sass by default out of the box. It kind of touts itself as zero configuration, and you can get started without any config, which is amazing. If you compare it to Webpack and others. It also does static site generation like your blog and so on. You could do it with other frameworks as well, but I think Next.js is in the sweet spot of like flexibility versus ease of use. It even allows you to build APIs. So you can even use it for your backend as well instead of Express if you would go down that route. I'm not sure how feasible that is, but your mileage may vary. Overall, it has an amazing developer experience, and that's why we love it and we try to use it in as many projects as we can. But now, enough talk. Let's get to coding and let's see how we can work with Next.js inside Docker. Now, I'm going to switch over to my IDE, and I have an empty folder set up to create a Next.js application and then put it in Docker. I'm going to create by the default command yarn create next app period to create in this folder. It's going to take about 10 seconds to download the packages and install them because I believe I have all of them in my cache already. So this gives you a bare bone Next.js application, and you go ahead and start it with yarn dev. Of course, you could also use npm for this. You see the app is up and running. Let me switch to the browser. And there you go. This is what you see by default when you create a new Next.js application. This is your default screen. And it's actually pretty good. It's running as a dev server, so it has hot reloading and everything turned on. So let's head back to the repository. One great thing about Next.js is that your routes are set up as files in your file system. So this is the index.js that we're rendering right now. You can change this to anything you like. Welcome to the new world of Next.js. And if I switch back to the browser, you're going to see it automatically updates. And whenever you change it, let's change it back, it updates automatically as well. This is nothing fancy, right? Now, let's add a new route. I'm going to duplicate this and rename it Docker and say, happy birthday, Docker. Yes. Amazing. Now, let's go to the browser and switch to Docker. And there you go. Happy birthday. Yay. You can also change this without restarting the server. Happy memories, Docker. All right, now, nothing too fancy yet. There is also the possibility to do a production build. How you do that is by running yarn build, and it gives you a .next folder that actually has all the production files that you need. You can directly deploy it, or you can do yarn start, and it starts the production server. This time there won't be any hot reloading because it's running an optimized production version, and it's going to be much, much faster, of course. So this is how you run your production application, which is great, but how do we run it in Docker? How do we make this a seamless experience for all of our developers so that they have the same experience as the production server, regardless of their operating system? So what we do is, let's first, for example, start with a very simple development Docker file. I'm going to go to the root and add a new file here. And here we are. So the simplest way to start with a Docker file is to basically start from a base image. What we're going to do is we're going to pick a Node.js base image. Let's say Node 16 Alpine. And it's also a good idea to always create a working directory for your application. Otherwise, your files will be on the root file system, which is not a good idea. Let's put them under an app folder. Now, what you actually do when you do yarn create is you pick a template. And what we're going to do a similar thing here. We're going to copy our package JSON and our yarn lock files to this app folder. These are what are necessary to install this application. And then I'm going to run yarn install. Basically, this installs your dependencies that are out of the way. So this layer will be cached whenever you need to rebuild this image, which is great. If you don't change your package JSON or yarn lock JSON, you don't need to run these layers and run yarn install again, which is actually a slow operation. So you can quickly move ahead. Next up, I'm going to add my Next.config.js. So copy Next.config.js, which is all the configuration you need to start. And then we have a couple of folders here. We have the pages folder, public and styles. So I'm going to go ahead and add them as well. These are all the folders that I need right now to run my application. If I need more, I need to copy them still. And finally, the command to run our application is yarn dev. It's what we did in the terminal. So this is actually very simple. We create these files, do yarn install, and then do yarn dev. That's how we run our application. Next up, in order to work with this better, I would like to create a Docker Compose file because I'm not going to build and run this Docker image on its own. I need a Docker Compose YAML. So even though it's not quite necessary, I start with the version declaration. I define a service. Let's call it an app service. The image name should be Docker Next.js, I don't know, dev. The build instructions is very straightforward. Just build this folder. And we need to define the ports that we have. Let's find port 3000 and we should be good to go. Now we run this by Docker Compose up, but I always add two more, and that is build and force recreate. Now this basically builds your image from scratch and runs your application. You see it has compiled. Let's go to the browser and see if it's there. Yep, Happy Memories Docker, it's there. Welcome Next.js, it's also there. Yep, all good. This is now running from my Docker Compose file, which is super neat. Let's head back. All right, let's review what we did. We have a Docker Compose file and we have a Docker file. Super straightforward. We have a base image, we copy our files, and we define a command yarn dev. And in Docker Compose, we build the current folder, define some ports so that our application is accessible, and everything is good. There's a challenge though. If I go and change Happy Memories back to Happy Birthday, you will see that it's not automatically updating my browser. In fact, even if I refresh, it's not updating because hot reloading currently doesn't work in this build. That's kind of a bummer because in development you would actually really benefit from hot reloading. There's no need to go back in experience. So in order to enable that, we need to change our Docker Compose a little bit. And we're actually going to mount these folders, these pages, public and styles folders to our Docker container so that Docker can read them live and pick up any changes and do whatever it needs to in order to refresh our application. So I go in and type volumes, and here I need to add pages to app pages, public to app public, and styles to app styles. Now if we run the same command again, docker compose up build force recreate, you will actually see that the application is updating in real time. You can see it in the console. When I'm changing and saving the file, it is recompiling, which is actually super good. Let me switch to the browser. Happy birthday, happy memories. Happy birthday, happy memories. All right, so we have a development Docker file. Now, just because we mounted these folders, we can actually remove them from our development Docker file, which makes it super simple. You just add your package.json, yarn lock, yarn install, your next config, and then just do yarn dev. You don't need anything else. And this is your Docker Compose development file where you mount your volumes. Super cool. It just works. Now, the more challenging bit. How do we make this run in production? What should we look out for in production? Now, for production builds, we need a stripped down version, first of all. It needs to only run, it needs to only include what it needs to run, and it needs to be performant. It needs to have a small image. It shouldn't include any artifacts, build artifacts, or unnecessary libraries and so on. So Next.js already gives us a production build, but it's only for Next. We also need to do a production build for our Docker container. And now I'm going to talk a little bit more about the best practices of building a front-end Docker container for production, to run in production. Let's go ahead and create a new Docker file. I'm going to call it dockerfile.production. Now, this is a little bit challenging. I'm going to paste an entire file, which is a dried version of an example that you can find in the official repository from Next.js. But I'm going to be talking a little bit more in detail what it does. So it's like from 10 lines, we went to maybe 50 lines. Let's see. Here, we start with the same base image, but this time we call it dependencies. We're going to use a multi-stage build here in Docker. It's an amazing feature in which it lets you discard intermediate layers and come up with only a tiny image composed of a small number of layers. So we do use the first layer to install our dependencies. We copy our package.json file and yarn lock and run yarn install. Be careful, we have frozen lock file here, which is super important to ensure that you only install the exact versions that are specified in your yarn lock. And then we're done. This layer is done. It's going to be cached, and when it's used in the final production image, it's going to be thrown away. We don't need these layers at all in our production image, in our final image. This basically saves you from doing one single run command with a bunch of slashes and ampersand characters and so on. That's what we used to do beforehand. Now, in the next layer, we're going to use a builder. And we use the same base layer, base image, and what we do is we define our working directory again. This time we copy our Next.js configuration file. We copy our source code as well, pages, public, and styles. And we run yarn build. This is the layer that builds your production application. Now, we ran that command before. We know that it gives us a production optimized build. Now, as a last step, we have the runner. The second step will also be discarded in this final production image. It's only going to be this layer, the third layer, the final layer in production. And this is where we create a new user. And we stop using the root user and switch to Next.js user. You can read more about the security bits of why it's important to use a non-root user in production. But what we do is we copy the public folder, the static folder, and a folder called standalone from Next.js. Now, Next has this amazing capability to create a standalone version of this application to run in production, which means you don't have to do any management of custom package JSON, or you don't need to worry about like development dependencies or anything. It is a trimmed down version, production optimized version that can run on its own. You don't even need Yarn or whatever. So there, in that regard, it also gives you a new server.js that you need to run with node command. So this is going to be our command, node server.js. All right, so this is the production build. It is a lot of steps. I encourage you to take it line by line, to go through it and see what it does. It's not super complicated. And the best thing is this gives you the minimum amount of layers in production. Now, there's one more thing we need to do in order to make this work. Next.js has an experimental feature called standalone, and we need to activate that for this build to work. And you do that by going into next.config.js. This is the only configuration. You actually don't even need this file up until this point. You put an experimental flag of output standalone true. You do this, it creates the standalone build, and you can run it with node server.js. Now, again, in order to make this happen, let's add a new file, docker compose production. Let's not change this. Docker compose production YAML. And here, this is actually going to be way simpler. I'm going to, again, define a version. I'm going to define my services, app, image. Let's call this Docker Next.js for production. I need a build step. The Docker file should be Docker file production. I define my ports. And I think we're done. Let's go. Now let's stop this. Now, in order to run this, you need to add the production file name for Docker Compose. So it's going to be Docker Compose -f Docker Compose production YAML up build force recreate. Yep. It's running the multi-stage build, a little bit cached. And we already have our application listening on port 3000. Let me go and try that. Yep. So if I switch to the browser and refresh, you're going to see we have happy memories and welcome Next.js. Now, of course, it's not going to update. Let me switch back to the code base. It's not going to update when I change happy memories to happy birthday. Switch to the browser, refresh. It's not updating because this is a production build. This doesn't even have like any of the source files. It doesn't know how to build this. For this to work, we have to rebuild it from scratch. So we run the docker compose up command again, and we run yarn build again. This is like a tongue twister. We run yarn build again, and when we switch back to the browser and refresh, we see happy birthday. Happy birthday, Docker. All right. Basically, this is all there is to it to run Next.js in production. You can use Docker Compose in production as well. That's something I really like to do because it's really easy. to define your services in this fashion. And yeah, that's it. There you have Next.js running in Docker, both in development and in production. It's not a lot of lines. It's a very good starter for your development and production efforts. And feel free to use the code base. I'm going to put this up on GitHub. I'm going to share the link with you in a second. Let me switch back to my presentation. Yes. All right, with that, thank you for listening to me. Thank you for watching my talk today. It was an amazing experience to be with this great crowd here. You can see the link to the slides and to the repository. Feel free to play with it. Feel free to download it. Change it however you like. And if you run into any issues or if you want to chat, just drop me a message on Twitter. And I hope to see you next time. Happy birthday, Docker. I'm really happy that you're with us. And I'm really happy that we're doing this together. Bye-bye.